Thank you so much. I'm Sani Chendi from APNIC Secretariat support for the SIG chairs of Cooperation SIG, NAR SIG, and Policy SIG. As we have elections in this Cooperation SIG session, we have to do the elections first, and then I'll hand over the floor to the current chair of the SIG. So can I have my slides, please? Okay, these are the elections for the Cooperation SIG. Dr. Govind, who is the current chair of the SIG, his term finishes end of this conference. And we have sent a call for nominations to the APNIC talk as well as the Cooperation SIG mailing list on 23rd of Jan. This is as per the SIG guidelines. We have to post it to both the lists. And the nominations closed on Friday, just last week on Friday. The term of the service is for 2 years, so whoever gets elected at this conference, at this SIG session, will have 2 years term, and that will start after this conference. The chair responsibilities, as detailed in the SIG guidelines, there's a URL down there, but I'll read some of the important ones. The SIG chair the SIG session, that's primary importance of the chair. Call for presentations and develop the agenda, which you will see in a minute when the current chair comes up. Present the report, SIG report in the member meeting. It could be AGM at the Apricot APNIC conferences or AMM, which is APNIC member meeting at the APNIC standalone conferences. Must subscribe to the list and stay subscribed to the mailing list to post information, to facilitate the discussions, and anything else that come up during the session as well, Now, the chair's responsibility is to directly engage with the community through this mailing list. So that's why we request the chairs to be subscribed to the mailing list all the time. Election procedures, candidates must be present in the room. And I will call the candidates one at a time. They have an option to speak for 2 minutes, either from the mic on the floor or they can come up on the stage here. Now, voting is by those present in the room. And when I call for voting, I would like to see your hand, if you are voting for that member or that candidate, I would like to see your hand rise up with your registration badge. All right? So you must show your registration badge because you have to be a registered participant of this conference. So if you just raise your hand, we won't count. You must raise your hand with the registration badge. And the election is decided by a count of show of hands. All right. The count is taken by my colleagues, and they will pass it on to me, and the largest number of counts is whoever receives the largest number will get elected. So the list of nominees as received is first Dr. Rajesh R. Is he in the room? Dr. Rajesh R. Does anyone know if he is present in the conference? No? If not, I'll go for Dr. Govind, second nominee. I invite Dr. Govind to give a two-minute speech, please.
Thank you, Sani. So, standing before you, like to place before the community my nomination for the Cooperation SIG, as I have the relevant experience and work in the public policy and internet governance space from a developing country perspective, both in the government as the technical and in the technical community, with diverse multi-stakeholder groups at national, regional, and global fora since 2002. In my previous tenure as chair of the Cooperation SIG, I served the community by bringing and discussing on issues of relevance and brought the themes of trans-border cooperation on cybersecurity, who is accuracy, present status and its challenges, who is database, challenges of data protection and privacy, and internet content blocking and filtering, challenges and way forward, which are all relevant to the internet and ethnic community here. Apart from contribution to the international public policy dialogue through GAC and other global IG fora, as head of the Internet Proliferation and Governance Division in the ministry, till 2013, contributed extensively to the multi-stakeholder consultation. I worked as an expert in the internet governance space and have served as the CEO of National Internet Exchange of India from 2011 to 15, a Section 25 company set up under the Indian Companies Act as a public-private partnership towards the promotion of internet and with the cooperation of ISPI. Formerly, I served as Senior Director, heading the e-infrastructure and internet governance areas in the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India. I held key posts in the ministry and had more than 20 years experience in various sectors of IT, internet governance, broadband, e-infrastructure, interministerial group coordination, and varied areas. During my work in the government, I learned the importance of building the consensus, but most important, ensuring inclusive, robust, and meaningful dialogue among the stakeholders. Finally, my motto is to serve the community as Cooperation SIG Chair for the next tenure. The idea is to involve the community in more and more public policy dialogue process, which are in relevance from the relevant internet governance perspective. As newer technologies such as AI, IoT are emerging, I hope to have more such cooperation in public policy space from the community. I firmly believe that a confluence of my tenure in the government, my vast experience in ethnic community, and my continuous engagement in public policy space will go a long way in enriching the community. I humbly seek your support as a member of your community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Govind, and good luck. Now I invite Joy Chan.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and to tell you a little bit about myself. My interest has been with the internet community for many, many years. I'm coming from a background with my current position at TWNIC from Taiwan. So as you know that the NIC has a lot of the different work that's related to the internet community. This is where my interest is, and I believe that's also your interest. So prior than this, I actually coming from the more of a research organization in the cybersecurity. And in that research cybersecurity organization, I pretty much has been lead the team to do many of the cybersecurity projects. And other than the research community that I have been served, I also was the CTO for Yahoo in Taiwan, leading the technology groups, doing the different products and the service. So I believe that with the mixture of the background from the private sector as well as the public sector, it gives me a ground view about how everything should work together. So with the cooperation SIG, I believe there's many things that I have very firm belief that we can do in this community. There's the internet governance. I think that that's a big issue or a big area that we can put in our efforts in there. And also, other than that, the different sectors with the government sector, with the private sector, with the nonprofit organization sectors, the cooperation SIG should be able to utilize the various efforts and the contribution from all the different sectors and use that as a platform in today's platform, in today's SIG, in order to do many of the different cooperations that we can work together. So the cooperation things actually really coming from many different aspects and from the different view and different audience. I believe that with the platform that's already been established, the forums that we have today, we can initiate many different issues and many different topics and move ourselves to a better, a safer internet community This is where I think that I can also bring my technical expertise as well as in the practical private business conduct to this society. So I have been a long-time participant in the community. And today, I just want to share with you, I think that the best effort or the best way to really contribute to the society is really to take position and be able to just contribute whatever that we have in the past. And I want to take that leading position and help everybody in this internet community, especially in the Asia Pacific area, to work together. So I hope that with that mind in myself and with the help with everybody, the contributors here, in every individual users and participants here, we can make a difference and make a better internet society for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you, Joy Chen, and good luck as well. Now the last candidate, Venkatraman.
Thank you, Sunny. Good evening to everybody. Let me take this opportunity to wish you all have an interesting week ahead. I am Venkatramanan from India, currently representing as Senior Vice President, Corporate Affairs with World Phone Internet Services Private Limited, pan-India Internet and VoIP service providers. I am also an active Executive Council member with the Internet Service Providers Association of India since 2016. The charter of this cooperation, SIG, which is related to broader internet issues and issues of relevance to the public affairs and the sectors, and the matters on the community positions, has interested me in applying for this particular post. I have expertise in dealing with bureaucrats in government and other organizations, including with multivarious stakeholders. Internet governance and other areas of importance to ethnic community are my passion. Given an opportunity, I will transform this passion to play a supporting role in the APNIC's vision for a global, open, stable, and secure internet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Venkatraman, and good luck as well. Now I'll call for the voting of each candidate. I request the APNIC staff and the other RAR staff from not participating in these elections, please. It's only for the community here. So those who are in support of Dr. Govind, please raise your hand. Dr. Rajesh is not in the room, so we're not going to take consider him for the elections. Those who are in support of Dr. Govind, please raise your hand with your badges. Have you done? Thank you. Now, those who are in support of Joy Chen, please raise your hand again with badges. Please keep your hand raised until the count finish. I believe Adam is asking you to raise high, please. Move on. Thank you. Those who are in support of Venkatraman, please raise your hand with badges. Can you raise nice and it's done? Yeah, thank you. I'll just wait for my colleagues to give me the tally, please. Thank you for all participating in these elections. APNIC Secretariat would like to declare Joy Chan as elected new chair of Cooperation SIG. Thank you, Joy Chan. Now I would like to invite the current chair and the co-chair to the stage, please, Dr. Govind and Bikram Shrestha, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sunny. I congratulate the new chair, Jay, for this position, which she'll be taking from the next conference. Now, coming to this session, I invite my co-chair here, Bikram, and we have a session's panelist, Mr. Satish Babu, Akinori, Mr. Rajneesh, and to be here, join the seat here, and Mr. Suman. There is Mr. Rajneesh. So this session, as you all know, is the internet content blocking and filtering, challenges and way forward. Good afternoon to everyone. The session is beginning now. The Cooperation SIG, as mentioned by Sunny, is a forum for internet public policy concerning internet governance issues which are relevant to the ethnic community. This year's theme is the internet content blocking and filtering, challenges and way forward. With more and more people, I just give a brief to this issue. With more and more people joining around the world connecting to the internet has given rise to enormous amount of content creation in all facets of human activities like social, political, economic, and entertainment, etc. Increasingly, it has also triggered fake news, hate speeches, malicious and abusive content. Internet is designed as a global technical infrastructure which is open, globally connected, and needs no permission to communicate and create innovative applications and content. Intermediaries such as internet service providers, social media, and search engines are the platforms through which internet content is facilitated to the end users. While these platforms are global, the content is often local in nature. There are two types of contradictions here. On one hand, freedom of expression and privacy issues become important to the end users, whereas the governments and law enforcement agencies are concerned about harmful and illegal content, which increasingly are often disturbs the public order and threatens democratic norms in the society. The question is, what kind of content needs to flow in these platforms, which type needs to be blocked, filtered, and what norms, policies to be followed. There is a need to have a balance among the various stakeholders, how this content blocking and filtering is going to affect conflicting requirements of users, service providers, technical network community, policymakers from the point of view of compliance, cost, risks, technical expertise is the critical question. Further, a way forward may be to have a dialogue, collaboration, cooperation within the multi-stakeholder environment. It looks like more and more countries are indulging in censorship of content in one way or the other. Further, I came to know that here in South Korea, there is an internet censorship to HTTPS level with first countrywide use of server name indication filtering. This session will run for 90 minutes to hear from various stakeholders on these challenges. I will stop here now, and now we have a distinguished panel here to deliberate on all these issues. We have Mr. Akinori Maemura, who needs no introduction, as is well-known in presently GM for Internet Development Department of JPNIC, and which is a not-for-profit internet promotion body and national internet registry for Japan. Started his career for internet when he joined the project to launch an internet service provider business in NEC Corporation in 1994 after his engagement in network engineering for X.25 packet switching services. His original expertise was network engineering, focusing on architecture design, internal routing, BGP routing, peering coordination, interconnection, and IPv6. Akinori was selected by the ASO to serve on the board of ICANN. His term will expire at this EGM 2019. So I will request Mr. Akinori to be here for his presentation. Before that, can we run we had an interesting session during the IGF in Paris on this particular topic. So I will request Mr. Pablo if you can run that video for 5 minutes.
We feel that content blocking and filtering is sometimes necessary, but it should be executed as a part of a due process in a technically and also especially legally correct way.
Methods that are used to limit access to certain content are suffering, so to speak, from this inability to have access to the full incriminated content. Is instead of blocking access to particular content, many of these methods will limit or block access to certain hosts, to systems, to the resolution of domain names, and so on and so forth. And that will also affect the effectiveness of these methods.
There are a couple of mechanisms that amount to blocking the endpoint where the content you're trying to filter comes from. So you're not actually blocking the content, you're blocking the point where the thing came from, and if there's other content on that target site, you're just out of luck. That you can't actually block endpoints from end to end in one place. You actually have to block it throughout the network, through all of the cooperative network. If you want to block something reliably, you have to get every network to block it themselves, because there's no center of control on a network of networks, because there's no center. The other thing is that you have to block the endpoint rather than the content.
So what we found is that there's a lot of talk about the advances of AI and machine learning. However, accuracy is still an issue, resulting in underblocking or overblocking of websites. So underblocking refers to the failure of filtering to block access to all of the content targeted for censorship. And on the other hand, filtering technologies often block content that they do not intend to block. So that would be overblocking.
So I also would like to mention that content blocking on internet infrastructure at ISP's infrastructure is BRICS' main internet principle, simple network, smart edges. This principle brought our internet to success, to current success, and now, well, it's endangered.
There's a bit of a standards battle between DNS over HTTPS and DNS over TLS. The weakness of DNS over HTTPS is that it has to be provided by a single entity, which is typically not going to be your enterprise or internet service provider. It's instead going to be probably the content distribution network, and the CDNs are their own for-profit companies. So instead of having your choice of many different possibilities, some under your own control, and so forth, these offerings are typically, there are only a few of them, and they are very commercially oriented. And very commercially oriented often means at the expense of individual privacy, particularly if you're not paying for that as a service.
Okay, thank you. I think now request Mr. Akinori to be here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garvin. Hello, everyone. My name is Akinori Maimura from JPNIC. For this blocking session, I'd like to introduce you for my presentation. Is now up now? No? Okay, yes. What happened with content blocking in Japan in 2018? This presentation is like an overview of what happened in that regard in Japan in 2018. We are able to discuss a lot of things for this content blocking theme, but what I am bringing up is just a factual report for the happening. And then after that, I will introduce you some discussion points we had throughout that happenings in last year. So very high-level summary of what happened. We actually had a quite big maybe loss for the intellectual property in the manga. It's a cartoon. As you know, the cartoon manga is really, really popular in Japan, and even quite adult, senior people that enjoy manga for their own, the leisure time. But these days we had a big problem of the piracy of the manga, and then 2017 we had a big rise of the one piracy site whose name was the Manga Mura. Mura meaning village. Then it's a manga piracy site. It's very famous. Was gathering a lot of page views and then infringing the proper profit for the legislated contents. Then as this problem raising higher. In last year, 2018, on April 13th, the cabinets, the Japanese government's cabinets decided for the contents blocking to be legislated, and I will talk something afterward. And then we had one particular task force. For discussing the countermeasure for the countermeasure of the piracy, and then it lasted 4 months for discussing that regard. And then in October 15th, 2018, the task force concluded that activity with no outcome. It is a little bit interesting point. So what happened with that task force? This is a quite rare case, but this Cabinet Secretary's decision was covered by English. You can find this from the Japan Times website. It happened in April 13th, and then in that day, the Japan Times covered that. Japan calls for emergency measure blocking access to the website that pirate manga and anime. So it is directly dealing with that decision by the Cabinet Secretary. On that day, as the report covers, there was a cabinet meeting for the anti-crime measures held on the day, and then decided the three things. One thing, there is a need of the countermeasure for the piracy website or for manga, anime, etc. Second, for the three most harmful piracy sites, it is appropriate that the access providers block the access to them as their spontaneous efforts for the time being. It's a little bit funny, this expression, but Cabinet Secretary decided it is appropriate. Hey, access provider, you do that. It's appropriate. That's all. Then the third point, for the time, the ISP effectively requested from the cabinet to do the blocking, but the cabinet decided that intellectual property strategy headquarters of the cabinet secretary should do the due consideration with the experts and operators involved toward the legislation and the other measures needed. So for the time being, they requested to do the contents blocking for the ISPs, and then they would think about consideration of the legislation. So in June 22nd, we had a new task force formed, whose name was the Task Force on the Countermeasures for Piracy Sites on the Internet. It is launched. It's a little bit of detail, but under the Committee of the Examination, Evaluation, and Planning of the Intellectual Property Strategy Headquarters of Cabinet Secretary. And then if you have the sense of the Han character, Han character may mean a lot, much more than in English. So the task force chaired by the two co-chairs, Professor Nakamura of Keio University and Professor Jun Murai, as you know well, of Keio University. And then 18 other members from the from Association of Telecom and Internet, and I was there. And 5 from publishers and the Publishers Associations, and 1 from the Customer Association, and 6 jurists whose expertise were for intellectual property, constitution, telecom policies. That's the composition of this task force. And the task force had collectively 9 meetings plus 1 workshop in the 4 months. It's really rapid pace to do the meetings. It was really busy days for us to do this. And then these 9 meetings and 1 workshop, we do the consideration. Then one good thing of this task force is that this is really transparent. So the headquarters website has all materials and the minutes. Minutes is like just the record of the dialogues, and then task force meetings of the task force meetings at their own website. But I'm afraid they are all in Japanese. So if you can understand the Japanese, then there is a lot of materials there. Then conclusion. Actually, that task force is a little bit, I rather say, biased. Then, as this is kicked off by the cabinet's decision, the cabinet secretary seems to have the intention to submit a bill to legislate the contents blocking to the ordinary diet session of the financial year 2018. So the conclusion is predetermined in this the task force. Then with this background, task force was really polarized between the for blocking and the against blocking arguments. So there was no really, proper, reasonable level discussion there. And then finally, in the 8th task force meeting, the against blocking members, they have the 9 members who are against for the legislation, refused to produce the task force report. It's meaning, so the other member of the task force said that, we had a discussion, why not we produce the report? But the anti-blocking people understand that if we had the report, including the anti and for blocking argument, then the for blocking argument only picked up by the diet, then it will be legislated. That's the reason why the anti-blocking members refused to produce the report. And then consequently, that task force concluded without any report, no report, only the recording of the meetings. So this is the fact. Then discussion points, we have the 2 or 3 discussion points. One is the secrecy of the communication, which is the concept within Japanese legislation. And then the second point is the approaches to address the piracy, other than the blocking. Discussion point number 1, secrecy of communications. So secrecy of communications, we have the provision to protect secrecy of the communications in two law. One of them is the Constitution of Japan at Article 21st, and then the other one is the Telecommunications Business Act, Article 4. Then the secrecy of communication is a little bit complicated concept, but the one famous blogger in Japan, Akimichi, made the epic blogs to explain this concept. So please check this blog to learn more. But very roughly speaking, secrecy of communications is like this. Very fundamental point is the acquiring anything from what subscribers send to the network would violate the secrecy of communications, even the header of the IP packets. That's a fundamental concept. And we have the 4 exceptions to allow that violation as the proper purpose. One is to achieve the proper purpose of the business. Second, for an emergent need to address the current risk. Third, without any other means to avoid such situation. Number 4, gain by the misconduct is more than the loss by the violation. These 4. For example, the routing. Routing itself is, acquiring the IP address information from the packet. It is a violation of the secrecy of the communications, but it is definitely needed for the, purpose of the business, which is routing the packet and deliver it to the destination. So it is now legal because of this reasonable exception to violate and infringe the secrecy of the communications. Second, for the child porn case, in fact, there's already the contents blocking is deployed in Japan's internet to block the access to the child porn site. That had a really huge amount of discussion to make it happen years ago. But in this case, emergent need to address this current risk is really, really important, because the abused children is now infringed their own human rights. It is a tremendous amount of the need for the emergency needed there. Then, and by the blocking will infringe some rights, but that loss would be exceeded by the game by this conduct to protect the children. So this is justified to do this. Then how about that for the context blocking? It is, is that to achieve the proper purpose of business? Apparently not. And are there any emergent need to address the current risk? Is it emergent to protect the intellectual property? And there's many other means to protect that. And then the gain by the conduct is more than the loss by the violation. So this is the secrecy of the communication was really heavily discussed in the last year, mainly among the jurists and the industry players. Then we had some discussion for the other means. Actually, we have a lot of means was discussed there. For example, the reinforcing the digital right protection mechanism, and then promote the distribution of legitimate content, moral education, outlawing the download of the contents, suppress search result, address leech sites, and then suppress ads, removal request, take down that CDN, identify and enforce such piracy site, and then filtering at the client, blocking at the ISP. They are all to address this piracy influence. But if we had some countermeasure, we need to combine all these effective means to achieve our target to suppress the content blocking. So, but in this discussion, the content provider only argued the content blocking is the only means to address that issue, and where the anti-blocking people didn't allow that, didn't agree on that. So that was the situation in 2018. So that's the progress report in what happened in Japan in 2018. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akinori. Our next speaker, Mr. Suman Ahmed Sabir. He has been working in the Bangladesh internet industry for last 18 years. He is presently working for Fiber at Home Limited, which is building telecom and internet network infrastructure throughout Bangladesh. He also worked for BDCom Online Limited, one of the leading ISP as managing director and CTO for 10 years. Suman contributed in developing BDIX, the only internet exchange in Bangladesh. He has also volunteered in SANOG and ISPAB in differently capacities. So I would ask Suman, okay, what kind of content blocking and issues are faced by ISPs in Bangladesh, if you have anything to say on that.
Thank you, Dr. Govind, and thank you all for listening to us. And I wish all the countries have laws like Japan for privacy law, so that nobody will intercept in between, and then we will have a lot easier life as a network operator. But it's not the case. So I will try to take a different approach. That basically, what I feel that we are trying to solve a socio-political issue by technology. So it's really getting challenges day by day, and we need to find a solution to that. And the reason is that internet is now become most diverse, powerful communication tool, and it's very easy to create opinion using these tools, rightly or wrongly. So as a result, the government are also now very keen to have a control over it, and there is the main challenge. And there are many motivations for that. In many countries, as mentioned in Japan, child online protection is one of the key issues. Religious belief causing content filtering in some countries. Political motivation, we can see in many countries that actually causing nationwide content filtering. And fake news, one of the recent phenomena that every country and every people is actually concerned about that. There are many, list can be very long, but there's a few key component we can see that people are blocking. But what does the content blocking occurs? We are doing content blocking for a long time at our homes to keep our children away from some certain contents. Some local network level in enterprises, they are content blocking to save employees manpower, not to go to social media or something. That is also a common phenomenon. And in career and ISP level, there's some sort of content blocking. And in some country, actually, government actually kind of by law asking the operators to block certain contents. And in many countries now already they're mandated by government policy that all traffic entering or leaving the country must pass through some kind of filtering mechanism. So I just try to get some statistics that actually what's happening in different countries. And this is a transparency report from Facebook that in second quarter of 2017, these are the top countries that have sent requests for content filtering to the content provider. This is somewhat good that they're not blocking in the middle, but asking the source of the content to block the certain content. But you see that it's not only the emerging economy, all sort of countries actually have requests for some sort of content filtering request. And if you look at the Google's transparency report, you see the main reason for content blocking request by the government is national security. So somehow, for many countries, that the content passing through internet is the main reason for national security, one of the main reasons for national security. So there is a challenge we are facing. And we see more and more countries actually going towards content blocking. And there are many different techniques being used. Some ISPs, they're filtering prefixes as ordered by the government. And some are doing some URL filtering. And there are many other tools. DNS-based filtering also very common. And some country actually putting kind of man-in-the-middle attack kind of thing, putting deep packet inspection tools in the transit point and monitoring whatever passing through the network. And we're also noticing internet shutdown in many places, actually. And in fact, this DPI has become a major concern that is not only blocking certain content, and as a result, if you notice the video that if you block content by an AI algorithm or something, it actually causes many other content which have no relation with that particular site, but getting blocked. And using DPI, actually, the concern about privacy and human rights, that's really, really being violated. And also in some country, the suppression of freedom of speech also becoming concern due to this internet filtering. If you look at the picture, that is it's a inline DPI at the internet transit in a South Asian country. And almost every ISP has a similar box from the government. And some guys, the equipment is much more bigger than what equipments they have for providing internet service for their community. And all the traffic is going to that. And the MTS rack is basically by another government agency. They're also putting their similar equipment to monitoring and filtering contents. So it is, if you notice in many countries, actually, either passing law or even without any law, the government is doing that in many countries. I just try to get the statistics. I'm from Bangladesh, so last 1 year, we have seen content blocking and filtering. Requests came to ISPs, and among them, a large number due to the political motivation. There are some gambling sites, and recently we are seeing they're blocking pornographic contents. And there are other, like defamation and many other reasons they are blocking content. So this is the 1 year statistics from Bangladesh. And interestingly, you can see that internet shutdown is also happening in many parts of the world. Maybe to avoid some kind of, to stop the flow of information in a volatile area of the country. And you can see here also a huge list, and many countries are doing that. So we are kind of in a difficult situation in terms of content blocking and filtering. And as a technical operator, we are offering services that we are also, one challenge actually to getting the desired result without breaking the internet. For example, in the December 30, in Bangladesh, we had a national election, and we also got requests to block many contents. And eventually, users not being able to even download email attachment from the Google, because some of the URL is filtered, some of the IP address is filtered. End result is that very common services also sometimes denied. And for the ISPs, it's become really a big pressure from the government to block a specific content. And from that stage, actually, now we are moving to the kind of deep packet inspection kind of thing that actually they can decrypt the traffic and monitor what is going through. And to block a specific content to a specific user base, sometimes actually it's turned out to be blocking an entire service from a whole nation or a region. So these are the challenges, technical challenges we are seeing. But in real life, there are fake news, there are terrorism, there are defamation, financial crime, and many other anti-state, anti-social activities, and which influencing government to have a strong control over it and resulting content blocking and filtering. But on the other hand, we are losing our privacy, freedom of speech, and the open, free internet we talk about is kind of in danger, actually, due to that. And in some cases, it's also limiting the voice of the unheard people. And another thing is technology evolving every moment. So you started the technology used for blocking, next year it's not going to work, or next month it's not going to work. So can we really, I'd like to throw this question that can we really solve this issue by filtering or blocking? Or we should look for a social and political solution to that. And at the end, we have content blocking here as well in Korea. So it's almost everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Suman. I will now request Mr. Rajneesh, who is Regional Director, ISOC, Asia Pacific region, to talk about the content blocking. What kind of ISOC perspective on this issue?
Thank you. So I could speak for an hour or two perhaps on why content blocking and filtering is a pretty lousy idea. However, I fear if I do that, I'll be just preaching to the converted. I would assume most people in this room would understand what the technical limitations and the silliness around it are. It occurred to me while I was looking at the panel, the issues we're raising, they're largely political issues. So the question to think about is, why is it now suddenly that so many countries around the world are looking at some form of content filtering, looking at some form of site blocking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? The reason is very simple. Today, the internet is all powerful. It permeates pretty much every fabric of society. So what does that mean in reality? In reality, the power now resides in the internet and what people can do with the internet. Our political masters have suddenly realized, some have woken up to it and have tried to use the internet for their own advantages. Some have failed miserably, some have done well out of it. But the point remains that they now realize that things that people can do with the internet can potentially threaten their political existence. So there will always be an attempt to try and see how we can control this thing. Throughout history, when there has been too much power residing in one community or one type of segment of society, whatever it may be, there has been an attempt to try and crack down on that power. And I think that's what we're seeing today with the internet, to a large extent. Now, content filtering, blocking, all the things that Suman Bhai talked about, Maimura-san talked about before, I think we all know what the issues are. The thing is that this dialogue needs to happen with governments, and we need to then educate them why it doesn't actually work. Now, we also know that governments are very dynamic. They change very often, particularly in some countries. So the person you speak to this week may not be there next month or next year. So that, for a lot of us in the community who work on these issues, that becomes problematic, whether you're an ISP or someone like myself from the Internet Society or the ITF or ICANN or wherever else that you may be working. Because the new person that comes in has a completely different spin on things. They may not even understand how the internet works. So it just becomes a continuing exercise in trying to educate. They leave, some new person comes in, we try and do the education process again, and then it just keeps on going on and on and on. Now, it would have been nice to have someone from government on this panel, so we could have had a more interesting discussion perhaps and see what their point of view was. Of course, Dr. Govind was in government, but he's retired now, so I won't put him on the spot. And if you look at what sort of reasons people are using today, fake news is probably the biggest buzzword right now on why governments are trying to crack down on the internet and social media and so on. A short while ago, child pornography was a big thing. Now, child pornography is interesting because, a couple of years ago, we were getting a lot of requests from people saying that, we are getting the government trying to crack down on sites and et cetera, et cetera. Can you help us, give us some data, provide us with some facts on what the actual landscape is in the region? When we looked around, we realized actually no one had ever done a mapping exercise in the Asia-Pacific region looking at what child online policies exist by governments across the region. Now, not all governments have those policies in place, but some actually do, and some are developing them. So we did a mapping exercise, and the report is on our website. You're quite welcome to look at it. And we have noticed that a lot of people are citing that report now. Now, the report covers a lot of things, but let me just highlight one thing that's very important in the report, and that is that there is no harmonization when it comes to child online laws and definitions in the Asia-Pacific region. Even the age of a child in one country is different to another. How a child is defined, what the age of consent is, that's also different. So therefore, content that may be legal in one country is illegal in another, based on those policy guidelines that exist. So, so the issues that contribute to this are far wider than, there's child porn online, or we need to stop that fake news thing because, this happened or that happened. I think Maimura-san very nicely presented how that the secrecy of communications is an important thing. And the things that were being proposed in Japan were actually incompatible with existing laws. Now, that happens very often. In South Asia in particular, we have, sometimes I feel that, in one country in particular, if a dog barks at night, someone will say we need to shut down the internet because the dog was barking. Right? That's how ridiculous it has become, and the country in question is India. The number of shutdowns that country has seen is absolutely ridiculous. And for the most stupidest things. It's got to that extent where a local police officer can order a shutdown of the network. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. Where's the process in that? Where's the transparency? Where's the accountability in that? So there's a whole bunch of these issues which, we have tried to identify. We've got a couple of papers out on why internet blocking and all that is bad. I'd invite you to have a look at that. But ultimately, I think these conversations have to be done in fora where people that need to be educated are there. Of course, the people in this room here, the technical community, you also need to know what other responses people are doing, what other resources are available, so that, when you get hammered with a shutdown notice, okay, if it's given by the regulator, you have to comply, obviously. But at least there can be some attempt to try and see, let's knock some common sense out of this, because why this is a bad idea. I'll stop there, and I'll hand back because Bikram is showing me the phone saying it's time's up. But I hope we have a good conversation out of this.
Further go into interaction mode. I think now next is Mr. Satish Babu, who is Aprilo Chair from ICANN.
Thank you very much, Dr. Govind. My name is Satish, and I represent the, can we have the presentation, please? The end user community within ICANN, the so-called at large. Most of what I have to say resonates pretty well with the people who spoke earlier, because there is overall concern. And also coming from India, this concern is actually heightened. Now, when you speak from the end user perspective, you have to go down to the basics. And here are some definitions. What is it? It's blocking content. Is it blocking, filtering, censoring? What is the right word? Depends on who's speaking about it. Governments would like to sound very mild, so they call it filtering. A civil society activist would like to kind of make it very clear, and she would call it censorship. So it's all the same thing, finally. Now, what is to be noted is that this process, whatever it is, does not remove the content from the internet. The content is still there. It only removes the ability for an end user to access the content. This is important because there are other ways, perhaps, to access the content. And this is not like takedown or GDPR's erasure or right to be forgotten, which actually means physical removal of the content from the internet. There are many technological means of doing this, none of them perfect, all of them with side effects, but they do exist. Some of them are commercial off-the-shelf products. And there is no universal standard for this. There is no, RFC 7754 provides information. And it's been pointed out that some countries are using this to create blocking systems. That's not the intent of that RFC. Where is it done? On my laptop, at home, at school or college, in an office, in a region like a district, in a whole province, or even a whole country. And in India, we have seen many of the latter ones in action. Why is it done? Personal reasons, maybe I want to protect my computer. Propriety, maybe students should not be going to certain sites, so schools have policies on that. Productivity, in an office, maybe people shouldn't waste time, so maybe that's a legitimate reason. Is it lawful? I'm not so sure, maybe it depends on the jurisdiction. Complying with the judicial process, which is perhaps the most legitimate in this whole list. If there's a judicial order, you have to comply. So-called illegal content, pornography, hate speech, copyright, etc. This is highly variable, sometimes very subjective. Religious or protection of religious or cultural norms. Again, this is a very specific kind of a situation from country to country. On the basis of publicly stated policy reasons, like law and order. For example, securing financial transactions. So banking, sometimes, resorts to such a thing. But a blanket phrase called national security, which is often abused by many countries to impose, kind of blockade or even shutdowns. And finally, on the basis of unpublished orders to ISPs by the government. So we have absolutely no transparency. We don't know why it is done, but it is done. And sites are taken off. Why is it harmful? Again, many people have talked about it. It runs counter to the fundamental design principles of the internet. There is no kill switch. There is no technical feature that allows you to turn off sites at will. And this RFC 3514 is a joke. I mean, it's written as a joke. So if you look at the RFC, it talks about an evil bit. The technical solutions ultimately undermine the security and stability of the internet because of unintended consequences, side effects. The effect can be disproportional to the actual offending content. If you're going to ban a sweep or a band of IPs, both legitimate and so-called illegitimate content can be taken off. Causes unexpected behavior and frustration and reduces the end-user trust in the internet. Now, speaking from the end-user perspective, this is very important. So the end-user does not know what is wrong, where is wrong. Is it my ISP? Is it the country's policies? Is it my computer? No idea. Now, end users are negatively, therefore, impacted, often without any recourse. What do? There's nothing they can do. They can, at best, call up their ISP, and the ISP will say, well, this is the order from the government. The legitimacy is difficult to establish, and as Rajneesh was saying, no due process. Personal rights and freedoms infringed. In many cases, no transparency about the reasons, nor accountability to democratic processes. And sometimes these measures are overkill. And there is a cultural impact, particularly for youngsters, because they see only a restricted version of the world and not the entire world. It might impact end users from accessing legal content and overall subtracts on the stability and resilience of the internet. How do you overcome blocking? Now, for end users, this is actually an important thing. Now, the next slide will talk about some of the hacks to do this. Not that I'm recommending these things, but they do exist, and at dire times, we might have to resort to some of these things. So these solutions exist to bypass or to sidestep. But there are implications of cost, performance, conflict with law enforcement. Maybe in some countries, you're not allowed to use the sidestepping mechanism. And if you use that, you're automatically under observation. And sometimes you need the installation of third-party software, which many people today are hesitant. What are some of the technological solutions? For DNS-based hacking, you can run your own DNS server, so that you query only your server. There are new emerging technologies like DNS over HTTP, experimental, not proven, but which show some promise. VPNs are perhaps the most common, but VPNs means money. You have to pay for it. tunneling of SSH. If you have a server outside somewhere, then you can tunnel your machine through that using SSH. It is pretty simple on Linux, but you need a server out there that is not affected by the actual blocking. Anonymous proxies, browser extensions, Google Translate. Now this is an example of a hack. Now nobody bans Google. So if you go to, if you have the URL of a banned site, stick it into Google Translate and translate into a language that you know, and you will get the content there. Wayback Machine, archive.org is a very, very useful site because it preserves snapshots of the internet. Now you might be able to find your content on that site because they even maintain recent snapshots. An online PDF converter. There are online PDF converters which take an entire URL and convert it into PDF. You are no longer accessing the original URL. You are simply downloading a PDF. So this is another way to sidestep. But you also have the more modern cryptocurrency or Tor related. And Tor is a well-established technology, but it is not in the normal discourse, especially in this kind of fora where we talk about the basic DNS-oriented things. But there are Tor-based and also IPFS, which is a new technology, again closely tied to crypto, wherein you are actually going to take a file and distribute it so that it is not in one place. My last slide. Now, content blocking is reality. You cannot run away from it. It is maybe a legitimate requirement for some very specific edge cases. But as a concept, blocking goes against the spirit of the internet. Practically, it raises performance and security stability concerns and puts a burden on the ISPs. For the end user, there are various concerns from human rights to productivity because you're blocked from accessing these sites. And what we would have ideally liked, especially in the context of India, and I'm sure several other countries also, is a consultative process by the government to take the citizen and civil society organizations into confidence so that we are aware, the society at large, the end users are aware that there is a process and this is how we can appeal. So that that's a smoother way, perhaps the smoothest way to ensure that this is manageable. Thanks again for the opportunity. Bye.
Thank you, Satish Babu. I will now request my co-chair to give some few 5 minutes presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Govinda. I just highlight Nepal case. In context of Nepal, after a gap of 8 years, the government is getting up with its plan of banning pornography content, citing increase of case of sexual violence in the country. Google, just before Satish sir briefed that, Google trend indicate that in Nepal, over 70% of internet users searching porn on Google search engine every week. And Alexa Amazon ranking web data traffic shows that 4 pornographic sites falls in the list of top 50 sites in Nepal. In my opinion, personal opinion, before trying to ban pornographic content, the government should be clear on what wants to achieve through this ban, and whether this step will achieve the objectives, which I feel it's difficult to achieve through these steps. Just last week also, the government has also issued a takedown on a song related to corruption from YouTube a few weeks back due to political threats. Such acts of government raising concern on the issue related to freedom of speech. Also issues such as internet access, cybercrime, online pornography, and criminalizations of legitimate expressions are taking the center stage. Currently, Nepal has no data protection law or transparent mechanism for blocking or filtering. To ensure that any type of content that is filtered and blocked is legitimate and does not affect the rights of users, the state should develop a concrete and effective policy in consultation with individuals from all stakeholders of society, including the private sector and relevant government ministry. This will ensure that internet is widely open, available, accessible and affordable to all while harmful content is restricted. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vikram. Now I will open the floor for any Q&A now, please. Colonel Prahar.
Thank you. In number of forums where I have been, this matter is coming up again and again, where internet and governments are coming at loggerheads with each other. Now just let me clarify this. Internet has permeated every core of our existence today, and whatever is left, it will do in the next coming few years. Your education, your health, your government services, your entertainment, I mean, you talk of a field, it is there. Now, when such a thing is there, and it is affecting lives of people, obviously, legitimate governments will have interest in it. And if legitimate governments find that this medium is being used for matters which go against the existence of the nation, well, they will take steps. So, it is a sovereign right of the government. After all, who has elected that government? You and me. So, to say that they are at loggerheads would not be a very right thing. Yes, like Satish Babu said, that we must have due processes. Due processes have to be there. The governments must take on board the civil society and formulate laws, rules, regulations. But blocking of internet, filtering, censoring, or whatever it is there to stay. Only thing what we need to now do is to find better ways and means of complying, because it is all, it comes now onto the technical domain. So I think time has now come for us to not be at loggerheads with the government, but support the government in genuine requirements.
Thank you. Anybody wants to make comment? Mr. B.C. Jain.
For the record, Rajesh Jain here. Thanks, Dr. Govind. One of the questions, as Satish Babu explained, that blocking affects productivity. Sometimes unblocking also, content which is not desirable also affects the productivity. That is number one. Number two, when few children die, for example, I'm giving example, some software called Blue Whale resulted in 8 or 10 children taking their lives using that software. So what option does the government has in such a case? So I may ask Satish Babu or Rajneesh, whosoever may answer. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the last two interventions. I agree, and I think there are certain things that we generally have an agreement on. For example, child pornography. Every country will support that. And earlier, Akinori-san was telling us about the fact that there are certain things which are like child pornography, which are blocked everywhere. And I don't think we are really complaining about such things. We are looking at the fact that, as Rajneesh mentioned, there is such a lot of variation between countries. Some countries are doing it too much. It's overkill. Other countries are maybe not doing it at all. And that is where we have an issue there. Otherwise, fundamentally, some things, I think there is universal agreement. Thank you.
Thanks.
I just make one point, actually, that like he mentioned the case of Blue Whale. I know it's in India, and we have found some cases in Bangladesh as well. That so to stop that, is blocking content in between is really not solving, actually. So there are ways of bypassing it. Rather, what I can see that the core of internet, that is the intelligence at the edge, either block at the source or block at the end. So it's not impacting the operational issue or anything. So probably we should look into that whenever we're blocking it, but not in between. Thank you.
Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Dr. Govind. Paul Wilson from APNIC. I'd just like to say thanks for the interesting session and thanks to all the panellists, because I think this topic is potentially, I hope, of interest to the APNIC technical community. As something that's really an increasing issue and something that is almost like a fact of life these days. I think there's not too many people, except in idealistic moments, who might say that the government should never block anything, because we know that governments almost everywhere are doing that. I've mentioned this before in this context, maybe in the cooperation SIG before, but I was at a very interesting meeting a few years ago where this was being discussed. It was at a RightsCon meeting, which is a sort of civil society internet rights event, and there was a really interesting process. A group of people got together to draft some principles on internet blocking. They called them Manila Principles, and they're online at manilaprinciples.org. Interesting thing is it was mostly a civil society group concerned about rights and about how blocking is done, concerned about and wanting to put down principles about how blocking should be handled by governments, and very pragmatically kind of on an assumption that governments were going to continue blocking. They weren't sort of campaigning to stop blocking. They were actually concerned about how blocking was to be done on an assumption that it was going to continue. And the interesting thing about it actually is that the concerns of the civil society are actually really very similar to the concerns, I think, of the industry, because it had to do with how governments are complying with existing laws, how they're implementing laws transparently, how they're implementing transparency and reporting and kind of natural justice and all those things that we kind of expect governments to do in implementing laws. And I think the Manila Principles say quite well, how governments should approach blocking. If they are doing blocking, they should do it in accordance with transparency and predictable principles and principles that everyone understands. And so although that was a kind of civil society production, I think it's something quite interesting for the APNIC community as something that came out of our region actually, and that I think does actually help to give government some advice or some pressure about how they do go about this kind of inevitable, well, what I think is inevitable blocking behaviour. So that's just for reference. I hope this topic might go on with more discussions in future. I think Simon's very brief summary of how internet blocking is done in different ways is a really interesting technical discussion, especially with the sort of changes that we heard about in the IGF session about the DNS protocols being adjusted and so on. But also I think this question about the principles under which blocking is done in ways that actually can actually be much more acceptable to members of this community is quite important as well. So thanks. And just before I finish, I wanted to say thank you to you, Dr. Govind, for your service on this SIG over the last couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wants to comment? Mr. Pankaj Chaturvedi.
Hi, I'm Pankaj Chaturvedi from ISPI, India. So we all know that there are no boundaries in the internet, but unfortunately the policing or the government, they have the boundaries. The issue here is that how do we talk to each other? The various stakeholders are sitting outside the boundaries. So right now, I think from the Indian government perspective, what we see is that the Indian government has mandated that the data has to be hosted locally. Today, why the blocking is happening? The blocking is happening because the content is not in India, content is not in that economy, and it is stored outside. And to get it blocked or to get it removed, you need to, have various steps. You need to go from the CBI to the Interpol, and from Interpol to that, it takes time. So what is the shortest possible way of doing it is you issue instructions to the ISPs to block. So I think, as I mentioned, that there are no boundaries in the internet from, this group or from APNIC or from the ICANN. There has to be some way wherein, there are ways and designed that, such kind of incidents don't happen, or if such kind of incidents are happening. So there is a way to have a workaround and effectively remove the content instead of, blocking it, because as we are network engineers, we understand what blocking means, what it means to the network. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Akinori?
Yes, thank you very much. One good thing in the discussion in Japan in the last year is that actually that task force is aiming, attempting to legislating the content blocking, but we had a tremendous amount of discussion outside of blocking to how to address the piracy. In that discussion, we had, for example, some content publisher says that CDN operator doesn't accept any disclosure request or something like that. But for taking a counter for that argument, someone tried to do that with one famous CDN operator to have them disclose the information about that content source using the United States the legislation mechanism. Then that's actually proven to be effective. So that kind of now we are in the internet age. Internet age meaning that any information in all over the world can be retrieved in any place. So the other social system need to be adjusted to achieve that. For example, the enforcement power should be reinforced to enforce everything. Everything, but if the illegal site is at the far end of the globe, but still we can enforce something if they are violating law. So it is really needed for now the internet era, but it is really hard at the same time. Thank you.
Anybody else wants to?
It occurred to me while Mamura-san was speaking that, and I was just reflecting on your slides with that multi-stakeholder group that came together as a task force. So I think one of the issues that we've also seen across the region and across the world for that matter is that it usually becomes the operators against the government when these sort of things happen. So if somehow you can tweak it a little bit and convince the government to facilitate a multi-stakeholder task force to come and discuss the issues and find a way forward, although you may not reach a conclusion, obviously, but that's also fine because at least you've identified the issues. I think what often happens is that you have, it becomes a government versus the operators match, and usually the government wins by slamming not its own order for you to just act on that. But if you have other voices who can provide a bit of balance to the argument on why this doesn't work, be it civil society or academia or other parts of the private sector, I think then the discussion becomes a bit more balanced, and hopefully the government would then have a tendency to say, okay, it's not just the telcos and the ISPs who are saying this, but it's also other sectors of the community, so maybe we need to pay a bit more attention to this. So I think there is a need to drive the process in that direction as opposed to just be all and end all in a two-way bilateral meeting with the government and the technical community operators. So just some food for thought.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions to the here? So thank you very much. I would like to thank each of the panelists here for having a wonderful session on the various aspects of the internet content blocking and filtering. And I would like to also thank the audience and other people here for listening to the whole patiently. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Dr. Govind, for your long service as a corporation SIG. You're the inaugural chair.
Yeah.
You brought us in this level, so thank you very much.
No. Thank you. I would like to thank Paul Wilson and Akinori and other community here to posing trust on me from the beginning of this corporation SIG was formed way back in 2012 and 13. I remember it was a very difficult thing to start with, but now I think it has reached a stage where we can take further issues and public policy matters in a very systematic manner. Thank you very much.